Hi everyone, Victor here again. In this lesson, we're going to look at how to set resource quota in OpenShift. In our previous lesson, we looked at how to set resource limit. So what is even resource quota? From the word quota, which means a fixed share of something that a person or group is entitled to receive, quotas too can be set on Kubernetes or OpenShift resources, and quotas most times are set on namespaces. Let's say you have production namespace and development or test namespace. You can decide to set quotas for Kubernetes resources in each namespaces. So for example, you can decide to set quota in a way that just 10 pods or 2 secrets or 5 services or X numbers of any Kubernetes resources will be created in a particular namespace according to your needs. You can even decide to set CPU or memory quota for a particular namespace. You might want to set a large memory or CPU quota for production namespace more than that of the development namespace. So you see, quotas basically is used to administer your cluster, to track, limit, and set restrictions for resources that will be created so that any team will not just create resources without considering the total resources in the entire cluster, which might use up the entire resources in the cluster or reduce performance or even crash the whole cluster itself. So let's look at the step-by-step guide of how to create quotas in OpenShift. So let's create quota for object count, that is the number of Kubernetes resources. So I already have a YAML manifest file for this. So if I do cut quota2.yaml, so you can see this YAML manifest file. The kind is resource quota. So the name of the resource for quota can either be resource quota or just quota. And the name of the quota is production quota. And for spec, we're going to be specifying hard limit for this quota. So meaning that we're going to be limited to just creating 3 pods, 2 services, and 2 config maps. So let's create this quota. So if I do also create file, which is quota2.yaml, you can see that the quota has been created. So if I do oc get resource quota, you can see that we have this quota here. And if I also do oc describe resource quota production quota, you can see the information we have here. You can see that we have config maps, which is 2, and 2 has already been used. Wow. And for pods, we have 3. That's the add limit. We don't have anyone being used here, which is 0. And for services, we have 2, and we don't have anyone that's been used here. So apparently, I've already created 2 config maps on this namespace or project, right? So you can see here that I didn't specify any name for the namespace, meaning that I'm going to be creating this quota on this namespace, and the name and our namespace is app project, right? Now let's create a pod so that we can test this resource quota. So if I do cat deployment 6.yaml, so we're going to be creating an nginx pod. So let's do this. So let's create file deployment 6.yaml. So you can see that this has been created. So if I say OC get pod, container is still creating. Let's wait till the container gets created. So container is running right now. So we're going to try and scale up this deployment to 4, and let's see what is going to happen. So I'll do OC scale replicas for deployment and the next up. So you can see that this has been scaled. If I do OC get ports again, so you can see that we just have 3 containers being created instead of 4, and that's because the resource quota has limited us to create just 3 ports. So let's do this again. OC get ports. So you can see that just 3 ports are running, and that's because when we created this, like I've just said, we are restricted to just create 3 ports in this namespace or project. So this is how you set resource quota for object count. And if I do OC, let's look for the command again. OC get resource count again. Resource quota. So you can, I want to do OC describe. So you can even see here that we've used 3 out of 3. And of course, if we use the describe as well, describe. So we've used 3 ports out of the 3 add limits that we have in this project or namespace. Let's delete this resource quota. And to do that, of course, we're going to say OC delete resource quota production quota. So this quota has been deleted. I also want to show you that you can create a quota using the command line instead of the YAML manifest file. So whichever one that you prefer works fine. So to do that, we're just going to say OC create quota production quota. So this is going to be hard limit. So for pods, we said pods should be 3, and for services, we said this should be 2, and for config maps, we said this should be 2 as well. So you can see that this has been created, and if I do OC get pods, OC OC describe, let's just do OC describe resource quota. You can see that we have the same information. Let's create quota for compute resources. So I have a YAML manifest file for that too as well. So if I do cat quota for the YAML, you can see here that the name of the quota is production quota. We already have that, so I'm going to delete that one. And for spec, we have add limit. So for memory, we have limit and we have request. So like we did in the previous lesson where we set our limit, but for quota, it's going to be limit.memory and it's going to be request.memory. So if you wish, you can set your limits without setting your request. And if you wish as well, you can set both limit and request. And like I mentioned that if you do not specify your request and you only specify the limit, it will take the value for the request. So let's create this quota. I'm going to delete the first one we created, which is which is production quota. All right, so let's now create this new quota. So it's going to be OC, OC create file quota 4 YAML. All right, so you can see that this has been created, and if I do OC describe, OC describe, OC describe resource quota, production quota. Sorry, I seem to be a little bit slow this today. I'm feeling tired, so I'm sorry about that. Also describe, so we're having an issue, blah blah blah. So I guess this is a cluster thing. Okay, now you can see that this quota has been created. Excuse me. So you can see limit. You can see the add quota here, and you can see the use quota here. So this means that for this namespace, you can only use the memory, whatever resources that you're creating, it can it will only be limited to 300 megabytes, and the request, which is the minimum value of what you can get in the entire project or namespace, you will be getting 100 megabytes for the entire resources. You can also use the command line to create this quota. So of course, to do that, you're just going to say OC create quota, OC create quota, production quota, or let's just say dev quota. So we can create another quota with command line. So this is going to be hard. You can say CPU equals, let's say 3, and you can say memory equals 1 gigabyte. So you can see that this quota has been created. So you can either use the YAML manifest file, or you can use the OC command line. I'm going to delete this quota. All right, so we're going to do something right now. Let's try and create. We already have a pod running. Let's get pods. So I'm going to delete this, and we will try and create another one. So also delete deployment 6.yaml. So if I say also get pods, so this is still running. So get pods. So they are beginning to get terminated now. So let's check again. Also get pods. We can see that this has been deleted, and now we can create a deployment. So cat deployment 6.yaml. So I can say also create deployment six.yaml. So if I say also get pods, no resource, and so if I say also get deployment, So we can say that we already have the deployment, but we don't have the pod. And that's because whenever you specify a resource quota, once you get resource, whenever you specify a resource quota with memory or CPU sizes, and you do not specify those two in the pod will not get created. So as far as you've specified it in the quota, you also need to specify that too in the pod. So I'm going to delete this deployment. So I'm going to say also delete deployment nginx app. Okay, so I already have a YAML manifest file that specifies memory and CPU. So I think that is deployment for the YAML. All right, so let's create a pod with this manifest file. So I can just say also create. So if I say also get pods again, we don't have pods being created. If I say OC get deployment, we have deployment. So let's look at this file again. Deployment for the YAML. So you can see here that for request we have CPU and memory, but for limit we only have CPU. So we need to specify memory too because we specified both in the resource quota for compute resources. So I'm going to specify memory here too. So I can say memory. Let's use 20. Let's use 50. Okay. So I can say OC. So I can just say OC apply. So it's taking its time. So I can say also get ports now. Let's see what we're going to have here. So you can now see that the container is being created. So if I say also get ports again, the container is still creating. So what this means is that whenever, let me reiterate again, for compute resources, whenever you create the quota for compute resources, say CPU and memory, you also need to specify a quota in the pod specification file, or else the pod will not be created. However, if you don't want to always do that all the time, say you don't want to always specify the limit or the compute resources limit in the pod specification file, say you are creating like hundreds of pods and you don't have that time to always do that, there is another resource called limit. So you can either use limit to create resource quota. When you use limit to create resource quota, then you don't need to specify the complete resources in the pod specification file. Also, limit 2 is also called limit range. So you can either, the name of the resource is either limit or limit range. So let's delete this that we have here. So I'm going to delete this. And I'm also going to delete the resource quota that we've created. So what we're going to do now is to create a limit range resource. And before we do that, I just want you to also know that in the same YAML file, you can you can specify both object count and compute resources in the same YAML manifest file. So let me show you an example of that. If I say cat quota one.yaml, so you can see that here we have for object count and we also have for compute resources. So these two works fine. So having understood this, let's see the step-by-step guide of how to create the resource, the limit range resource. First, let's create a default limit range because that's the way it's going to work. So I have a YAML manifest file for that. So if I say cat limit range YAML, so you can see here that the kind is limit range, and we have metadata, we have spec, which is we have limit, and we are saying that the container that we're going to be creating in this namespace should take this default value, and this is even the default request, CPU 1, memory 300 megabyte. So let's create this limit range. So if I say OC create file limit range YAML, so if I say OC get limit range, I can also say OC describe limit range. So you can see the resources that we have here. We have the CPU and the memory, we have minimum and maximum, then we have the default request and the default limit. So now let's create that pod or that container again. So that's cat deployment 6.yaml. Alright, so I can say OC create file deployment 6.yaml. So now if I say OC get pod, so you can see now that container is creating, and we didn't specify the resources in the spec section. That's because we have already created a default limit range. So now you can see that the container is running. I want to show you another YAML manifest file for limit range. So this is another one. So there is no default here. So in the in some sections there, you might need to specify default before it can work without specifying the limit range in the port section of the deployment itself. So if you look at this one, this is limit range kind metadata. So the type of resource here is container, and the maximum CPU size memory, minimum CPU size memory, type pod, and type persistent volume. So the thing is, here you're specifying a limit, which is fine, but without the default, you would have to specify the limit range or the limit, whichever the case might be. You need to specify the complete resources in the pod section. So this is how you would create a limit range in OpenShift cluster. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye for now.